Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not exactly sure when you're gonna be watching this class. So as mentioned before, this is a recording that substitute our in-person class on open source and various models of crowd and community-based innovation. So I'm gonna share slides and I will make both this video and slides available for you in our Canvas website. So as you've seen, this is our class that was supposed to happen on March 27. So welcome to the past. Our agenda today is that one, first, like the purpose, the why we are looking for different types of innovation and process modules. And then we're gonna enter in some types of innovation that were theoretically studied and developed and help us today and also help the private sector and governments and civil society to really incorporate the crowds, the community, right? So when we talk about affected communities, these are interesting process to generate innovation, to generate new ideas that you can always think back to. We're gonna cover 3 of those cases: crowdsourcing innovation, open innovation, and user-driven innovation. A lot of these concepts are used interchangeably, but they do indeed mean slightly different processes studied by different academics. I'm gonna mention also some of the core academics that are leaders in these sectors and these models. So I want to actually start with real world examples to give you some grasp of what we are going to look at, right? And hopefully you can then connect these examples with things you've seen in the real world. So one is the Tesla open source patent strategy that back in 2014, Tesla made its patents open source to accelerate electronic vehicle, especially charging stations adoption, right? To accelerate the spread of that, right? The spread of that core infrastructure for its cars and other things. Tesla then encouraged collaboration among car manufacturers. So again, the plugins would be interoperable and really set open source precedent in the hardware industry. Aiming, and again, as I mentioned, was really trying to aim to grow the electronic vehicle market rather than limit competition, right? So it's very interesting that instead of protecting its own market, Tesla decided to share core infrastructure technology on EV, both on chargers and cars in the beginning, but then chargers to really allow the growth of market. And when we say open source here in terms of patents, it means that, as you might know, right, patent is intellectual property right that is given to new creations and new processes. Different from copyright, it's a intellectual property right called industrial property. So it's something that has to be registered in a certain office. Every country has its offices for registration of intellectual property rights. And the idea here is that Tesla would allow others to use their patents and not enforce their patent rights, right? Something very similar to Tesla strategy is the case of Nike with Green Exchange, where, for example, Nike, right, the shoemaker, also share their patents to things like new forms of rubber and other things like that. They limited the use of those patents, so while a competitor could not use the rubber technology that Nike created to also create tennis shoes, they could use, for example, to develop tires for cars that were more efficient. and less impactful on the environment. So these is a couple of examples. Another example is, for example, the constant commitment by IBM to open source software, right? So as you know, IBM has been a leader in the open source software development, supporting Linux, Apache, and more. In this case here, we are talking about open source in copyrights, which is another type of intellectual property, also over creations of minds, of creators, creatives, but also people like yourself who develop software from scratch. Different from other technologies, software are protected by copyrights, not patents in most cases. And when we talk about open source software, we are talking about copyright licenses that are authorizing the various uses, right? And you have lots of models of licenses. I'm gonna go over a couple of those models later on, but again, this is not the purpose of the class, but if you're interested, I'm happy to go through. You have a Linux license, you have various other free software licenses and open source licenses in the copyright sphere that are slightly different in terms of the uses they allow. So IBM, at the end of the day, by leading this open source development, really encourage enterprise level open source adoption. IBM has advocated for technology transparency and security, and it really hoped that through this leadership, it would build trust through open source initiatives, right? And when you think about open source, both in patents and in the copyright environments, again, you are creating avenues not only for trust and cooperation, but for transparency, accountability, skills development, so forth and so on. And that's one of the core relations why I feel to think through this types of innovation processes is really relevant if you work in public interest technology. Another example is Mozilla's Firefox community-driven development, right? As you know, Firefox has an open source browser that has been developed over the years and improved over the years with user contribution. So you have a lot of user-driven innovation here happening. And here the users influence feature development. There is a strong, and because of that, and also because of Mozilla commitment, right, to a lot of public interest issues, there is a strong focus on privacy and security, also based on the user demands, but also the business model of Mozilla. And this open source development at the back end by developers really has promoted continuous improvements and in some cases even disruptions in the browser. So in all of these examples and many more that we're gonna discuss during this class, innovation is seen as a system capacity to produce unexpected results, right? So when Emily covered some basic concepts and theories of innovation, we talked both of disruptive innovation and improvement innovation, right? The one that goes little by little. And here you see exactly that type of innovation, which is not disruptive in any way, right? We call this incremental innovation. And incremental innovation is generally adopted by the status quo, right? The status quo a lot of times is lower in innovating, in adapting to new changes. So, and by status quo here, I mean the incumbents, right? So if you think about the video, the online content industry in terms of videos, movies, etc., you can think about Apple or Netflix or other online players disrupting the older business models of, for example, blockbusters, right? So if you remember Blockbuster or even Amazon with online books and Kindle disrupting the book market and, for example, really leading to the bankruptcy of incumbents such as Barnes and Nobles, right? So it took a while for Barnes and Nobles to adapt to the online environment. So here is an example of this type of incremental innovation in the hearing device, right? So of course, if you want to hear better, you can move from a little hearing over here in the slide to an even larger hearing, right, device that perhaps can help you. And this is so interesting that the same incumbent industry try to say, hey, if our industry is about listening and hearing better, perhaps we can innovate to support intelligence gathering, right? So if you think about an incumbent going through processes of incremental innovation, you have this path from a little hearing device to a bigger hearing device with bigger ears down here that even looks like Dumbo, right? The two larger hearing devices, right? So clearly the incumbent in this market was not the adequate innovator because they adopted the model of incremental innovation and not disruptive innovation. And it's really important to look into a lot of this disruptive innovation has ways to really turn and shake the status quo. And it's very interesting to also think has pit values has a way to support disruptive innovation and not only incremental innovation. So one of the conclusions here in innovation theory is that you might not get the best innovation from main players, right? And I think this is very related to some of the mentality and skill set of engineers and other players that we have discussed in other moments in our classes. One example here of disruptive innovation is actually the internet here, right? So here is a drawing of the beginning of the ARPANET, which is the predecessor of the internet. Starting there back in the 60s, has an army-sponsored project in universities mainly, that started in the West Coast with a few nodes in the East Coast, and then it went internationally with submarine cables and satellites. And this was really a disruptive innovation, especially when later on the TCP/IP protocol and the web, the World Wide Web, were developed, allowing for faster adoption. So in the internet specifically, and that's a very relevant connection here in terms of disruptive innovation, nothing in the architecture of that technology was built to prevent people from building on top of it, right? So that's what we call generative technology, right? So the internet really allowed for this generativity, which is very interesting because this generativity is very related to concepts such as inclusivity and accessibility, which are some core PIT concepts, right? And it also allowed the emergence of the idea of the digital commons, right? The commons is an economic concept. It comes from in the past where you had land in England actually that was shared, right, by farmers who had their sheep grazing on common land, right? If you think about some environment trusts, right, that's also a common. If you think a couple of years ago, there was an economist that actually got the Nobel Prize for her theory on the commons. And the same happened online, which was allowed for the disruptive generative technology of the internet, allowing for lots of communities to be connected. And this is the core basis of a lot of digital innovation nowadays, especially with the internet and other communication technology has a core infrastructure for things like open innovation, user-driven innovation, and crowdsourcing innovation, right? Open source software and free software are core examples of those innovations, is specifically crowdsourcing innovation. So as I said, one of the unexpected developments, if you think back at that phrase by Jonathan Zittrain, who is a professor at the law school at Harvard, you really see the ability of people coming together to collaboratively create new things that were unexpected, right? So the internet was not created with the purpose of creating certain types of software, but that happened naturally because of its generativity qualities. The same way that you had in software development, you also had in content development coming out of this generativity characteristic of the internet. So one of the core examples, of course, is Wikipedia in terms of knowledge commons, facilitated besides by the technology infrastructure, the internet, the wikis, and that software. You also had Creative Commons emerging in the beginnings of the 2000s, right? Has the core copyright license to support creators share their content. It's very interesting to see that nowadays Creative Commons, but also licenses such as Linux and other open source and free software licenses are so common, right? They became intrinsic to the whole digital infrastructure, but actually it was not so easy. It took a lot of time for those things to get adopted and for folks to create business models around it, because again, the incumbents before the digital first companies and innovations, they were really trying to protect intellectual property at all costs, right? A lot of business models in the past, especially in the analog world, were based on copyright and patent protection and trademark protection and trade secret protection to generate income and sustainable business model. It took a while for the software industry to understand that it was okay to open license software, and even to the entertainment industry to understand it is okay to open license video and other creative content, because there are other forms of business models. We will not enter on those issues, but they are usually called open business models, right? Which generally open license the intellectual property while charging for services and skill development, right? So this is generally the business model that was developed in lots of ways. Of course, even the disruptors make good use of intellectual property. And so, of course, when the disruptors such as Netflix and Apple, etc., became incumbents, right, after some decades, they are leveraging everything they have available to develop their business models. So an example here is that CRM was adopted, right? We talked about CRM, content rights management, at one point. And again, using technology to then protect content for sustainable business models. But as you know, lots of companies, IBM, Red Hat, and so many others, Nollywood, right, which is the Nigerian film industry, there is a lot of open content and open source out there supporting sustainable business models. And more recent, right, which is also a potential disruption in AI, is the idea of open source AI. While there is not consensus on the concept of open source AI, you have a series of platforms emerging. The same way you had GitHub for software, which I'm sure a lot of you are part of and contribute to. So you are actually part of the crowd creating innovation. We have Hugging Face that emerged as a chatbot and actually completely transformed its business model to become an AI platform, such as GitHub for software. We have Hugging Face for AI coding and so forth and so on. Here are some interesting resources around that are starting to appear around the potential disruption that open source AI is bringing to the AI environment. It's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen here and what are the business models that will emerge around open source AI. the studies are just starting to emerge, and a lot of open source AI is still backed by investors. So a lot of the companies that are appearing in this ecosystem are actually not sustainable yet. They don't have a clear business model yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see, right? While there are some evaluations of Hugging Face on the amount of billions, that does not mean they are a sustainable business model in itself, because if the investors stop backing some of these models, you do see a lot of bankruptcies. So I think we are in a very interesting moment to see what's going to happen on the AI market in terms of innovation and business models, right? So here is the open source AI ecosystem. So this can mean lots of things. This mapping came from OSI, which is an institution that guards a lot of the open license for software, right? And they have mapped the open source AI, and you can see that scanning this QR code, you can access this website. And here, for example, are some of the AI acceptable license. So the same way you had certain licenses for software and Creative Commons for content, this chart here tells you what licenses you can use when developing AI. These are, of course, has a reference, the OSI definition of open source AI, but as I said, there is still no consensus out there. And that's because I think, one, the marketing is still forming itself, and two, there is a bunch of regulation around the world, including the EU AI Act, and I mentioned this a couple of times, that actually excludes open source AI from certain from certain regulations, from certain obligations in terms of compliance, transparency, so forth and so on, right? So it's very interesting to see large players such as Meta and others saying that their AI is open source. They are not based on the OSI definition, but they are based on their definition. Again, it's just that the field itself has not agreed on a specific concept for open source AI. So to introduce you guys to this theories, I just want to start again framing why I feel these innovation theories do matter for tech governance and public interest technology, right? So as we've seen, innovation shape industries, markets, and policies, and vice versa, right? It's a cycle. You do have more traditional models of innovation. The incremental way of innovation is more traditional. The incumbents way is more traditional, is where innovation just happens inside a firm, inside an actor, without really a lot of collaboration through the value chain of that technology, versus what were considered modern approaches to innovation 20 years ago, but actually have become the norm in lots of industries, right? So the theory of open innovation, crowdsourced innovation, user-driven innovation, they are actually theories from the beginning of the 2000s that were consolidated, even if it's some aspects of it came from other disciplines. These theories that I'm gonna introduce to you, they got consolidated in the beginning of the 2000s. And they are different because, again, you have more expressive roles of users, communities, and crowds in these modern innovation models. You potentially have more users and actors benefiting from the innovation. Again, right, if you open license, if you open source a patent, the rubber example from Nike, right, you are actually supporting innovation and better innovation across different fields, right? So one is the tire field, right, tires for cars, and the other one is rubber for shoes and other things like that. And again, you also have this idea of what is considered an inclusive, ethical, transparent, accountable innovation, right? Where you have these modern, more open approaches. It's more, those elements are clearer because you have broader communities involved, and thus you have better accountabilities, you have watchdogs, right, at the end of the day. So I really feel that understanding these theories have helped both policymakers and business to understand various emerging challenges too, right? So again, that idea of accountability and transparency of technology, which are very important. So by understanding open source AI, perhaps policymakers feel that there are less risks if the AI is open sourced, because again, other people can collaborate and improve. So perhaps you have less bias because you have more people bringing data, or more people fixing the algorithm, or more people contributing to the weight, so forth and so on, right? So you have different regulatory expectations. So as I said, the key themes are, that I'm bringing to you are open innovation, where knowledge flows across organizational boundaries, and we're gonna go deep in it on a second. User-driven innovation, user-developed solutions that business adopt, and that did not only happen in technology, it happened even in the apparel industry, where users, especially divers, for example, and climbers, right? Folks that like climbing really provided feedback to companies developing apparel in those sectors for improvement because they were the users. So they knew better what a better climbing shoes was, or what a better watch was for diving, or how comfortable right, some clothes were for diving, so forth and so on. And crowdsourcing, right, which generally leverage large groups, and a lot of times those actors are even anonymous, right, to problem solving, and we're gonna go through examples in that regard. And as I mentioned before, right, I feel there is a clear connection to public interest technology because these innovation models might better support responsible, ethical, inclusive innovation because they also demand more transparent, inclusive, and potentially accountable process. Is not that, of course, is not a fact in itself, but is a great is a possibility, right? Is a greater possibility of occurrence. So what is crowdsourcing innovation? Crowdsourcing innovation involves leveraging large, often online, right? It's easier to connect people nowadays online to generate ideas, solutions, or contributions for problem solving and product development, offering a broader perspective than traditional internal teams to the firm. So for example, you can harness collective intelligence for innovation. Ways to implementing this that you perhaps have been part of in the past are open calls, competitions, challenges, and always supported by some form of online platforms that connect people, right? So you have Wikipedia bringing the crowds to develop knowledge. You have Kickstarter bringing crowds for funding, right, to fund products, developments, and new ideas. You have the NASA challenges, right, that we're trying to deal with better data collection. You have Lego ideas, where users of Legos and the crowds in general were invited to help design new Lego models, right? And so if any of you is an enthusiast for open science, right? Um, um, you are dealing with crowdsourcing innovation. So there were efforts in the past on bringing people to, for example, map the craters in the moon. Another thing here around crowdsourcing is let's all share our computing power, right? If you have a lot of computing power back in your house. So in the past, especially before the large computer centers we have, right? People literally were sharing processing memory and processing space from their devices to solve large problems, right? So that's all related to this idea of crowdsourcing innovation. So crowdsourcing innovation encourages diverse perspectives, democratizes problem solving, enable rapid testing and iteration, creates new economic opportunities, and potentially reduce costs of innovation by spreading the innovation burden across a larger external group, right? So instead of, for example, NASA is spending millions on mapping the craters of the moon, and this is a real example. They asked amateur astronomers, right? Or, for example, uh, a university or a civil society organization trying to process, or even a lab, right, an academic lab trying to process large amounts of data, um, uh, spends less money if they borrow, right, processing power from lots of users around the world. So crowdsourcing is really related to this idea of collective intelligence, as you clearly see, and with the idea that these large groups can outperform individual experts. So it's really the idea that there are smart people everywhere in the world, not just inside your firm, and you never know where innovation is coming from. So crowdsourcing and these other types of innovation processes are really building from that idea. Another example, which is very recent and actually received the Nobel Prize, is the idea of folded, which is crowdsourcing protein folding solutions. So that's another example. And you have, in terms of processes, in terms of implementation of crowdsourcing, you also have this idea of swarm intelligence in decision making that's enabled by online platforms and some methodologies that capture the intelligence of the crowds. And nowadays you have a lot of AI assisted crowdsourcing, right? So Folded, for example, and some new AI models won the Nobel Prize. And I will bring, when I upload the slides, I will link to that example. Of course, there are some challenges in all process of innovation. So there is quality control and misinformation, right? So if you think about Wikipedia, one governance model that was adopted to deal with it was like certain hierarchies within editors, right? There are, but there also might be biases with whom those participate, in those who participate. Wikipedia itself, I worked for the Wikimedia Foundation for a while, and I remember very clearly, and this is public, right? Internal discussions on how difficult it was to bring more women and also newbies, right? So so Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation really tried to bring those folks, but it was interesting because the older editors, the more experienced editors, would create lots of challenges to these newbies. And it was a culture with almost like a troll culture, you know, where you had a lot of older editors, generally white men, and there are lots of studies and statistics on that. Really created a lot of barriers of entry to new elements, because even in a crowdsourcing elements, right, if a crowdsourcing processes environments, after some time there is the establishment of incumbent community with its own norms and governance norms. So anybody that's new, the barriers to entry increase with time. And of course, you have the risk of exploitation of communities by large corporations, right? And this happened a lot, for example, when large corporations, especially pharmaceuticals, were trying to access traditional knowledge of tribes and around the world and Native Americans and things like that, but also patients, right? But also in open aid, lots of examples of open science and other things, because in many cases, there was no form of remuneration, right? There were some tests that were remuneration based, but anytime some of these processes brought remuneration, and I'm remembering now some research that came out of Harvard in 2010, and I can link to that later, it really distorts the system and creates negative incentives for participation. So moving on to our next model, you have open innovation, which was defined by a professor from University of California, Berkeley. And I did some work with him around how to deal with intellectual property on open innovation. And the idea is that you have a firm, right? And innovation should be happening also. Innovation is happening outside the boundaries of that firm and should be brought into that unity. And that can be with different providers along the value chain of a certain industry, right? So vertically, but also horizontally across sectors, right? So it contrasts with closed innovations where the research and development stays within the firm, right? So if you think about collaborations between universities and the private sector, you might indeed be in the realm of open innovation. And so it encourages universities, startups, external researchers. So you can actually search, right? Open innovation centers around the world, and a bunch will pop up, and you're gonna see these different actors being placed even physically closer together to allow for this flow of ideas, right? So the R&D no longer stays within the boundaries of the company, and the key mechanisms are very similar. So licensing, joint venture, partnerships, and some examples that we mentioned that would enter here is the idea of the Tesla open patents and the IBM open source initiatives. So open innovation modules are different from closed innovations, right? Because as I mentioned, in closed innovation, you have internal R&D, internal research and development, restricted patents, very aggressive protection of patents, and generally slow progress, right? You have a lot of that happening in the pharmaceutical industry, for example. And open innovation, as I mentioned, you have external inputs, shared knowledge, faster development generally, because you are bringing a lot of diversity and interdisciplinarity in many cases to solve certain wicked problems. And you can both have inbound innovation, so external ideas brought into the firm, but also outbound open innovation where companies share their knowledge externally, right? So this is the representation, the visual representation of the closed innovation models to the open innovation models, where again, ideas in the closed innovation models just go into the firm and stay into the firm, into the corporate limits through trade secrets and EDA, just staying the staff, et cetera, while you have the open innovation where some of those ideas that start in the firm go outside and come inside, and through partnerships, right, or alternative markets or external technologies are brought in. So you see literally in the visualization, right, the limits of the firm are more flexible, more porous, right? And this also happens for government, right? When you have government challenges and things like that, what you see is open innovation processes being adopted. And of course, there are different levels of open innovation. So besides of the inbound open innovation or the outbound open innovation, you have intra-company, right, which is like around different, bringing different sectors and teams inside the company, inter-company for experts, or open publicly, right? So different levels, different models of way. And you can always think about that when you are yourself designing technology, right? Who you wanna involve to solve the problems you are trying to solve. Here are lots of examples of open innovation that you can So here are some examples that you can explore on your own and have fun later on with it. So moving on open source innovation, which is more on the software side of things. You also have hardware open sourcing, uh, um, um, but generally folks do think about um, digital technologies, right? So um, the definition on OSI is that form of open innovation, right, where knowledge, software, and designs are freely available for anyone to use, modify, and distribute. So again, these are very specific intellectual property rights being shared. So one can consider that open source innovation is actually an enabler of other forms of modern innovation that are more collaborative, that are more collective. Um, in this case, they are based on transparent community-driven collaboration. So if you think about um, this scheme here, generally, you're gonna see that happening on the column for experts and publicly open, right? So they are much broader. They bring much larger crowds in many ways. They are governed by open source licenses such as the GNU GPL, the MIT license, the Apache license, and other examples of usages are Linux OS, Mozilla Firefox, Wikipedia, and OpenAI initial ChatGPT releases. So some just core differences between them, because I know they are all very similar, is that in open innovation itself, it's managed by firms with selective openness, right? So if you remember of that picture portraying open innovation, one or another idea is going back and forth. The company uh, differing limitations, the company borders. In open source innovation, there is a fully decentralized and community-driven initiative, right? So you don't have generally you don't have a company, a firm at the center um, managing and governing how the process will work, right? You really have a community. Um, in terms of intellectual property rights on open innovation, you have shared under agreements or license. In the open source innovation, you have those licenses that are much more permissible. In terms of monetization, the companies at the end on open innovation has the central actors. They are the ones most profiting from that. On the OSI side, the revenue generated by services, donations, or support can be distributed, right? Because the software itself or that content itself is licensed and people can be creative enough to generate different business models around that. In terms of collaboration, you do have limited partnerships in open innovation. So it's a much more, you have larger actors generally participating. In OSI, anyone can contribute from anywhere in the world. In terms of objectives, right? In open innovation, there are market objectives in terms of really gaining competitive advantage and efficiency. And in OSI, generally, the purposes are more related to knowledge sharing and a public benefit, right? So if you think about Wikipedia and some of the softwares we mentioned, is really around, there's a lot of public benefit coming from it that's distributed. So some benefits, as I mentioned, right? Even in the case of the open innovation that are controlled by firms, you do have faster innovation cycles, you reduce research and development costs, you potentially increase collaboration and trust within the industry. So if you go back to the slide on examples, you see, for example, Samsung and Apple, which are competitors, and the final device actually collaborating in a lot of the fabrication of the components of those devices and really sharing those components through IP agreements. You might have a potential loss of competitive advantage or gain, actually, in some cases. But one of the challenge is also managing those partnerships effectively and controlling the intellectual property that's born from those partnerships. Some potential benefits, especially if you have, if the company was able to bring organized community, which are not anonymous, right? In open source, in OSI, you can have anonymous, right? Here, generally is much more control. You can have localized solutions emerging from the community engagement. And you can enable bottom-up participation. So one of the last models I want to bring it to you now is the idea of user-driven innovation. So in this case, we are thinking about users instead of companies creating the innovations or improving innovations that then the company will profit from. But a lot of times the users feel benefited because they are being listened, right? And they are getting better results from that innovation process. So if you remember the example of apparel, right? That was a clear example of user-driven innovation. One of the core professors and academic leaders in this is Eric von Hippel from MIT. And I can list some of the resources he produced in that regard. And again, as I said, in a lot of cases, the users are modifying existing products to fit their own needs. And a lot of times the companies will observe those and try to capture those so they can better their products. So some key examples are, again, healthcare, software, consumer goods. And one case example are snowboards and surfboards, where you saw users are innovating and then the company is going to check what they did and incorporating those changes later to their products, right? So as I said, one of the core thought leaders in user-driven innovation is Eric von Hippel, where lead user experience needs are generally ahead of market, right? Innovation is costly, right? And again, if you're just inside the firm, a lot of times if you're making money, right, that incumbent mentality, you're just gonna keep doing what you are doing, right? Remember the pictures from a little hearing device, you have a large hearing device. But here, the market, the companies are actually listening to their users, right? So these users develop solutions that the companies later commercialize. Other examples there are medical devices that are modified by doctors or market movements and do-yourself and electronics. So a lot of that, again, the market is listening to and adopting the innovations and the improvements that were created by the users in their day-to-day use of something. Here is just more examples of user-driven innovation. If you guys have played with 3D printing, a lot of innovation happens there. A lot of innovation, also user-driven innovation, happens in the gaming space and the science project, citizen science project that really happen on the ground by communities, right? People collecting data around a certain lake, for example, right? Or and really forming a knowledge community for a science that a lot of times people in the lab don't have the capacity or the funds to do. And hackathons, right? So you have hackathons that a lot of you participated. So if you are participating in hackathons, you are participating in user-driven innovation processes. If those hackathons don't have partnerships, for example, if those hackathons have a partnership, so imagine a government putting problems out there in the world for people to solve through hackathons, then you are thinking more about an open innovation is king. But if you just have hackathons that people create new ideas and improvements based on their use experience, then that would be classified as a user-driven innovation process. So they are really similar, but if you go back to the slide where I compare open innovation and open source innovation, for example, and I can create another one with user-driven innovation, you're gonna see there are core differences, especially on where the innovation happens, right? And who is leading that innovation, that change in regard to a product. And I really believe that both crowdsourcing innovation and user-driven innovation are clear models that empowers larger communities, the community at large, right? Because open innovation still is based on very institutionalized partnerships, and for the because of the need that the company leading it has to control the intellectual property. And in these other cases, both on crowdsourcing innovation and user-driven innovation, you have a more general benefit. It's true that in some cases, companies that incorporate user-driven innovation still can um, file for some of the patents, but in a lot of cases it's very hard, right? Because the idea was not developed by the industry, but by a community, and that became public common knowledge, and that then cannot be patent in some cases. That's a little bit more complex. I'm happy to discuss more the IP details with whoever wants to discuss that in separate time. Of course, there are challenges around scaling user-driven innovation specifically. So it's very hard on how we can adopt. Sometimes the user-driven innovation is so specialized for a couple of users, or for a certain environment, or for one community in one context, right? That it can be hard to mass produce that innovation. Um, um, you have always this issue of the corporation adopting it or not, or if you can just share at the grassroots level those improvements to product. That's something important also to that differentiate user-driven innovation from the other models, right? It's really related to improvements of other innovations. They still are innovations, but they are more improvements than disruptions. And you do have intellectual property concerns for user inventors, right? Because if the user invents, a lot of times the company cannot protect that, because again, they didn't invent themselves, right? It's coming from somebody else. So the company might not have the right to patent something that was generated somewhere else. And then, of course, then you have trouble fundraising in terms of raising capital, right, for those. And again, in a very similar way, you have this difficulty of bridging informal innovation, the user's innovation, with formal economic systems and business models that again are very focused on intellectual property. So some implications for us, I really feel that all of these models of innovation really demand flexible regulatory frameworks. And when I say flexible, right, it's because, again, even lawyers had a very specific way to think regarding protecting all innovations to intellectual property, right? It took a while for people to understand that things could be openly or free license, right? It has to, lawyers have to learn to say yes, then to learn to say no. But again, almost 2 decades passed, and a lot of those licenses became core infrastructures, right? People even don't notice they are there saying they are open licenses, just part of our new reality, right? But it took a lot of advocacy across the world, and even changes in laws or procurement by governments and companies, and all these governance schemes that would still mean that companies developing innovation based on these new models, right? The crowd models would still receive investment, right? So it's interesting to see now that companies now that adopt these models don't have so much trouble fundraising capital, right, than they used to have 20 years ago, because again, a lot of open models have proved successful over these decades. There are some other challenges in terms of balancing openness and security and privacy, right? There are some other challenges in terms of managing all the decentralized intellectual property that's generated, and again, encouraging innovation while preventing exploitation of communities. So there are some policy recommendations that came from these processes. Of course, one is the support to open source and collaborative tech policy, especially through government investment, company investment, right? It really took a large change on the mind frame of the mental model, if you wish. Invest in community innovation hubs and all the other infrastructure you need to bring the crowds closer to you. Um, and there is, of course, another push that you have. Perhaps you have to strengthen protection for all the digital labor and the crowd contributors, right? There are lots of studies, entire PhDs on what motivates people to contribute to this, right? And it really varies, you know, from intrinsic motivators to extrinsic motivators, right? From it makes me happy to contribute to Wikipedia, or I have difficulty making community offline, so I'm participating in this community online. To all the things from, oh, now I can make money teaching based on Wikipedia content, right? Those are just examples, and I can share some of those examples. So I think in conclusion here, there is this important idea that looking into these forms of innovation, of creating innovation, right? Processes that create innovations. They do, they can indeed support informing inclusive and fair tech policies, right? Especially, for example, if you think about the policy recommendations here and the challenges. So understanding these challenges, how we're gonna manage all these challenges in terms of governance structure, procurement, contracts, so forth and so on. We do see a lot of future technologies, emergent technologies dealing with this. So if you think about the Web3 and the Web4 and the idea of blockchain and decentralized governance supporting a lot of this, right? Blockchain has a way to create trust in a lot of this decentralized innovation. If you think about a lot of the ideas on users containing their own data, right? And instead of companies centralizing all the data, but the user has the data and can navigate various industries, and this being based on blockchain. This is actually a new 5 years or a little more project by Tim Berners-Lee, right? The creator of the World Wide Web, around using blockchain to allow user data control. And I can post that for you too, and I post the slides. Again, both legal infrastructure and technical infrastructure supporting these forms of innovation. And I think there is a call to action that come from a lot of our PIT discussions, right? That these are really ways to engage communities both in innovation, but also policy and governance design, to allow that all benefit from the innovation processes and the products and services that are generated, and that those products and services really take into consideration the impacted community or the benefited community needs, right? So that's all for now. I will upload the slides to the class soon, and also add an extra slide to share some resources with you that of course are optional, but I think really point to some great literature that allows you to dig deeper into these methodologies. These methodologies are adopted worldwide. Sometimes, again, the names are used interchangeably, but there is theory and different elements to each of them. but you're gonna get a lot of things under different names. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have enjoyed this class. Bye-bye.